Hey, what's up, everybody? Today we're talking about the infamous Kevin Durant and just a few of the craziest fights throughout his NBA career. These range from just pure arguments to pushing and shoving and even to standing over a player after he fell onto the ground. We all know Durant is a very competitive and skilled basketball player, but his emotions can often get the best of him, which is why these fights are more interesting than most others. Let's start off with one that was heavily talked about the moment it happened. This first one won't come as a surprise to many, but in a game between the Golden State Warriors and the Oklahoma City Thunder, Kevin Durant had some choice words for his former teammate Russell Westbrook. There was just under 7 minutes remaining in the third quarter of the game, and the Thunder held a 17-point lead over the Warriors. Durant was sizing up Westbrook along the perimeter when Russ was able to strip the ball away from him and send it out of bounds. Westbrook started shaking his head no and began walking away from Durant. But Kevin wasn't done with him just yet. He started jawing off on Russell, and at first Westbrook wasn't making any eye contact. But once Durant kept inching closer, the two of them bumped heads before finally getting separated by officials and other teammates who knew where this scuffle was going. The second teammates were able to get in between the two players, Durant started to clap and laugh while walking away from the pile, seemingly happy that he was able to get Russ all worked up for no reason at all. Though nobody was on Durant's side in this particular argument. As a matter of fact, the entire crowd in the Oklahoma City arena continuously booed Durant every time he touched the ball, and they were ridiculously unhappy that he was getting after it against their best player, the one that he left behind to go join the Warriors. But Westbrook wasn't the only player that he left behind. Roberson was another key piece of that Thunder team that Durant ditched, and he was the next guy to get in a scuffle with one of the greatest scorers to ever play the game. The Warriors were up by 20 points at the end of the third quarter, and things just weren't going well for Westbrook and the Thunder, which the crowd didn't like very much. So frustrations came out a little bit for Roberson. He gave Durant a very hard foul when he drove to the rim for a layup, and Durant went crashing into the stanchion out of bounds before hopping back up and heading to the free throw line. Roberson caught up to him as he was walking, and before you knew it, the two of them were forehead to forehead, yelling and arguing with one another. At first, teammates and officials were able to break the fight up and get them separated, but they each ended up circling back around their teammates to get into each other's faces once again. By the time the two men were finally spread apart, the whole crowd was booing and looking at what had actually happened on the big screen in the stadium. Officials then went to review the fight and ended up handing a technical foul to Andre Iguodala for some reason. That call was on top of the double technical fouls that were thrown out to both Durant and Roberson for the fight, meaning that extra Iguodala technical foul gave Westbrook a free shot at the free throw line in order to get themselves 1 point closer in the game. Maybe Durant doesn't like the Thunder that much after all. But for once, this next clip actually doesn't involve the Thunder. The Warriors were down by just 3 points against the Los Angeles Lakers with a little bit of time left in the third quarter. Durant was sizing up Josh Hart from behind the three-point line before attempting to dart past him and drive to the rim. When he started to drive, Hart flopped a little bit, and the referees whistled Durant for an offensive foul because his elbow grazed the head of Hart. As Durant started walking away, he was seen yelling something towards Hart before tossing the basketball at him. Hart didn't just let it happen though, he caught the ball and tossed it back before teammates started to get involved. They didn't stop Durant from walking up on Hart anyways before officials handed out a double tech to the two men. Now, this fight wasn't all that bad because there were no punches thrown and Hart was able to contain himself a lot better than most NBA players nowadays. But Durant was still heated over the flop, though the announcers for that game were more angry at the officials. They thought that Durant was the only one who deserved a technical foul for the fight, because after all, he threw the ball at Hart and was the one that instigated the scuffle by yelling at Hart. But then again, the officials in the NBA aren't always correct, and technical fouls seem to be an issue for them more and more. The next fight involving Kevin Durant happened to come during the NBA Finals a few years ago when the Warriors were up against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Durant was able to drive to the basket and attempt a dunk, but ended up getting smacked in the face on complete accident by Kevin Love, who was literally just trying to block the basketball. The commentators and officials were reviewing the play to determine whether or not a flagrant foul should be handed to Love, when suddenly a scuffle between LeBron James and Durant broke out. The cameras just happened to catch it, and the fight caught the attention of everybody in the arena. The two never got that close to one another, nor did they make any type of physical contact to grant themselves a technical foul, but they were yelling and arguing with one another for quite some time before they were finally separated, allowing the refs to once again go back and look over the film. But honestly, tempers flaring is completely understandable, especially given the circumstances at that moment. The Warriors were up 3-0 in the series, and James and the rest of the Cavs were tired of Golden State just cruising their way to championships. Cleveland held a 19-point lead at the time this argument happened, but they were down so much in the series that I'm sure frustration played a big part in LeBron stepping in to confront Durant, even if Durant's anger wasn't directed towards him. Now, in this next fight a while back, Durant's anger was definitely directed towards DeMarcus Cousins. This fight took place well before the two of these guys were teammates for the Warriors, with Cousins still being on the New Orleans Pelicans. Cousins had bumped into Durant during a Warriors possession with about 1 minute left in the game, with Golden State in the lead by just 8 points. Durant shrugged it off at first, but as soon as the play continued to develop and Cousins bumped him once more, Durant walked right over to him and started barking at him the second play stopped. Cousins obviously gave back some wise words of his own, but he barely even moved from where he was originally standing. However, the refs didn't care who started the confrontation. One official jumped in between the two of them and instantly threw each of them out of the ballgame. Durant was so focused on DeMarcus that he was still staring him down and yelling, but Cousins wasn't happy at all that he'd gotten thrown out of the game. And really, who can blame him? Durant was the one who ran over to him and started yelling, while DeMarcus just stood there and kind of responded back to him. Although, when Cousins started walking off the court, it was apparent that Durant said something else to him then, because Cousins immediately turned around and started storming over to Durant before staff members ran in there to split them up. Had there not been teammates and other staff members there at the time, the fight between those two could have gotten ugly, especially when you realize that DeMarcus has a pretty strong history in the NBA of getting in fights and getting ejected. This last fight was a big one. It occurred during the Western Conference playoffs between the Los Angeles Clippers and the Warriors. The Warriors were up by 11 points with 10 minutes left in the third quarter, with Patrick Beverly guarding Kevin Durant on the perimeter. Durant went to drive but was fouled by Beverly before he attempted a shot. As the two started walking back to the sideline to inbounds the ball, Beverly was throwing his arms up like Durant and making fun of him, while Durant just laughed and started trash-talking right back to him. This kind of went back and forth for a while before play finally resumed, but it later got a lot more serious. With 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, Durant got his shot blocked by a trailing Beverly, though he fouled Durant on the play. The two then got right up in each other's faces and started yelling and arguing before having to be split apart by the teammates and refs that were in the area. It's also worth mentioning that the Warriors were up by 15 points at this time, so Beverly was trying to give his team a spark to attempt to come back in the game. It seemed like the fight was going to stop for the time being, but just 20 seconds later, Beverly was taking the ball up court for the Clippers when Durant stripped the ball from him. Beverly attempted to save the ball before it went out of bounds, but wasn't able to, prompting Durant to stand over him and start yelling at him while he was on the ground. Beverly then got up quickly to get in the face of Durant, with the refs handing each of them technical fouls and actually ejecting them both from the game. Even now, Durant and Beverly still go at each other quite often, and it really doesn't seem like this rivalry is ever going to come to a conclusion. We hope you enjoyed the video. Check out the terrifying times NBA players actually fight fans.